What's happening, everybody? Ryan Thomas here on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. A big night, of course. The Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens will do battle in the AFC divisional round. But first, I want to remind you guys, tonight's the night, 8:15 Eastern Time. It's 7:21 Eastern Time right now. I provided you, Bills Mafia, not one, but two shows with two different guests in Phil Munson and Akeem Richens. Thank you both for joining me so much on the shows earlier today to preview and predict the Buffalo Bills battle with the Baltimore Ravens. It's going to be a great game. This is the biggest Bills game in 25 years. The Bills, if they do win tonight, they move forward and go to the AFC title game against either the Cleveland Browns or the Kansas City Chiefs. That game takes place tomorrow afternoon. Rest assured, if the Buffalo Bills win tonight, I will have my eyes glued to the television watching the Cleveland Browns and the Kansas City Chiefs do battle tomorrow. But football is just one page in the chapter of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. You go to a lot of different chapters, a lot of different pages in this book, and you would find yourself tuning in to combat sports analysis from yours truly in regards to anything and everything combat sports, mixed martial arts, boxing, fight news, fight breakdowns, previews and predictions. The ins and outs of the fight game take place right here on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. And this week, this day is no different. Today, UFC Fight Night took place on ABC, the worldwide news network. ABC, the old boxing network, in which Muhammad Ali didn't just come to take part, he came to take over on ABC with some classic performances along the way. Float like a butterfly, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. That's what Muhammad Ali did over the course of his boxing career, his legendary boxing career. But tonight, there was a fighter in the UFC octagon that took his own, I guess you could say, page out of Ali's book. He floated like a butterfly. He stung like a bee. He is the former UFC featherweight champion, Max Blessed Holloway. And going into this fight with Calvin Kattar, Kattar had come off two great wins over Jeremy Stephens and Dan Ige. But there are levels to this game. And Max Holloway proved that, and then some. I'm going to recap that fight. I'm going to recap the entire card that was UFC Fight Night, today's UFC Fight Night. But first, in the worldwide spectrum of mixed martial arts, you have superstars and then you have global superstars. Look no further than Khabib Nurmagomedov. He is a global, what I would consider a global superstar, and we finally have an answer to what is next for Khabib Nurmagomedov. What is next for Khabib is a wait-and-see approach per UFC President Dana White. Dana White stated that Khabib will wait and see who will provide something spectacular for UFC 257. Will it be Conor? Will it be Dustin? Will it be Dan Hooker? Will it be Michael Chandler? Khabib is just putting his feet up in the recliner, leaning back, letting that recliner recline, the lazy boy recline. He's going to watch and see what takes place at UFC 257. And if a fighter really stands out in a winning performance, of course, between the main event of that card, Dustin Poirier and Conor, or the co-main event of that card, Dan Hooker and Michael Chandler, he will fight the most impressive winner on the night. And, okay, I take in that information, I take in that news, and I say to myself, I'm calling a little bit of baloney on that, okay? And let me start off from the top here. The tension's palpable between mixed martial arts fans and Khabib Nurmagomedov. We have sat on the edge of our seat. We've walked on eggshells, wondering what is next for not just Khabib Nurmagomedov, but being that Khabib Nurmagomedov is the champion within the UFC lightweight division, we're waiting for what is next for the UFC lightweight division. When you have a champion, a reigning, defending, undisputed, arguably all-time great champion that Khabib is, reigning over a division, you're not just wondering what is next for him, you're wondering what is next for the division. How does the division move forward with or without Khabib, doesn't move forward with or without Khabib. So we're waiting patiently. And Dana White throws out a Dana White nugget, as he usually does, and says, well, you guys are going to find out whether Khabib Nurmagomedov is actually coming back. I'm going to announce it on the UFC Fight Night show at 3 o'clock, 3:05 or 3:15 was when Dana was talking cage side with UFC commentator John Anik. And he stated that, yeah, Khabib is going to wait. He's going to wait and see. And to be honest, I'm a little bit worried about the future of this UFC lightweight division given that news, because Khabib celebrates Ramadan. Beyond April, August, Khabib is not going to fight. Conor McGregor's fighting in late January. If Conor dusts off Dustin Poirier, pun intended, Conor's going to want to fight extremely quickly. Conor's going to want to fight as soon as possible. I see Dan Hooker and Michael Chandler being a little bit of a barn burner. Not saying it's going to be a war, but I think both of those guys will leave the octagon a little bit, damaged with some bumps and bruises, if you will. So it'll put those guys out of commission. Whoever wins that fight, whoever loses that fight will be out of commission as well. So you don't, I don't think Conor is actually going to have a fight lined up with Khabib here. And that's what's frustrating, because it's the biggest fight in mixed martial arts. I've been on record on this show saying that I don't really necessarily want Conor to fight Khabib again. I think Khabib would beat him 10 times out of 10. It's just a bad matchup for Conor. But in terms of the history of the sport and what it would do to move the needle for the UFC and for Conor and for Khabib and the money that it would generate, it goes without even saying. I mean, I couldn't even put a dollar figure as far as what a bout like that would generate for the company and for mixed martial arts, and obviously for both fighters. It seems as if Khabib does not want to fight Conor. He wants Conor to get past Poirier, and then he'll think about it. I just wish Khabib, for the lack of a better term, I wish Khabib would stop pussyfooting around and kind of tiptoeing around as to whether or not he's going to fight again. If you're a fighter and you are fighting in mixed martial arts, you're fighting in a brutal sport, you can't tiptoe around whether you should fight or whether you shouldn't fight. You're either a fighter or you're not. Typically, fighters that have hemmed and hawed whether they should fight or whether they shouldn't fight, they leave the sport with a damaged legacy. They leave the sport damaged far more in the last or next few fights, those last few fights, than they were their previous, 5 to 10 fights. There are a lot of examples of that. Chuck Liddell is one of those examples. Now, Chuck Liddell was long in the tooth. I'm not comparing Chuck Liddell to Khabib. I think Khabib is the best fighter in the world right now. Whether he decides to fight or not, he would be retiring as the best fighter in the world. If he continues to fight, he is still the best fighter in the world. I'm not saying that Khabib is Chuck Liddell, but what I am saying is Khabib is only leaving himself out there for more troubles in terms of damage, in terms of what else do you really have to prove? I think that's the side of it, convincing Khabib on my end to retire. The other side of it is, as a businessman, Khabib deciding to stay in it is extremely smart, because Khabib, he's going to get paid. He's going to get paid exponentially. There are a lot of multi-million dollar fights out there for him. Obviously, the Conor rematch is priority number one. He fights Conor. He beats him again. Does he walk away with 2 wins off of Conor McGregor? Possibly, but the money for that next fight against Charles Oliveira or against any of the other contenders like Dan Hooker or Michael Chandler, that's even more money that Khabib could demand out of the UFC if he does notch that second win over Conor, which I see as highly likely if they were to fight again. Would it be a entertaining rematch? 100%, but I just think Khabib is just such a bad matchup for Conor. I just don't see Conor really gaining ground on Khabib unless Conor shows me something that I've never seen before against Dustin Poirier. I just, in terms of the wrestling and ground game department, I just don't expect it to go down that way in terms of Conor getting a victory over Khabib. Plus, I really don't know if Khabib is as good for the UFC as what they let on. being that he is out of commission for a set amount of months due to the fact that, he practices the religion that he does, I feel like that actually takes away from his own drawing power. Khabib is really only fighting, once a year, and Conor is really only fighting once a year. Moral to my point here, the moral of the story is we really got to get the ball moving here. This UFC 155-pound division over the last, 3-4 years has been on a roller coaster ride. I want to see this weight class with a champion that continuously defends the title, dispatches his challengers or not. I want to see some movement in this division. And if Khabib doesn't know if he wants to fight, if Khabib doesn't feel like any of these fighters are worthy challengers outside of an amazing performance on January 23rd, then I think he's got to vacate the title and move on. The UFC needs to move on, and we can go from there. But it looks like Dana really wants Khabib to fight again because there's a lot of money made in that rematch, and as a promoter, you're always looking for that big money fight. So I get all angles of it, and explaining all angles of it, ultimately, I do think Khabib will fight again, and I do think we will see that Conor McGregor rematch, and it kind of fades into my preview and prediction for UFC 257. I do see Conor winning against Dustin Poirier, and I will go more in depth on the Conor McGregor-Poirier fight in a separate podcast, but for now, I do see Conor winning that fight against Dustin Poirier, and I see it being a dominant victory. I don't think a lot has changed outside of the weight class between these two gentlemen. I think both guys have evolved, but McGregor is still the all-around better fighter, and especially in the striking department. So we'll see. Poirier's greatest attribute is his toughness. Sometimes it's not always a great attribute to have, especially in the fights that Poirier has fought in and the fights that ultimately Poirier has won in. Those are some wars against Dan Hooker. Those are some wars against Eddie Alvarez. And that was a war against Justin Gaethje that Poirier put on a couple years back. So, to have your greatest attribute be your toughness, it's not ideal. That's not exactly the attribute that you want to have as a fighter for better or for worse. For better, it's, you're durable, you're nasty, you're a competitor. For worse, it's you're literally taking years off of your life. So it's kind of my take on the whole Khabib, UFC 257 situation. I hope Conor and Khabib do fight, in terms of how big of a fight that is for both guys. Money-wise, I think both guys deserve the opportunity to make that much money. And I think it is a legacy fight. But the fanboy in me really had hoped that Khabib would fight George St. Pierre. Call me crazy. I just personally would love to see that fight. I think it's the greatest right now versus the greatest of yesteryear. And it's a true rarity in combat sports that you have that opportunity to make a fight with that type of billing. The greatest of today versus the greatest of yesteryear. Which fighter is the better MMA wrestler, Khabib or George? As many would put on their list of the two greatest MMA wrestlers that the sport has ever seen. George, I do think, is the better all-around fighter, which makes the fight that much more entertaining in terms of the build-up for that fight. Wouldn't be really controversial, be very respectful. It'd be just a truly great fight for the sport of MMA rather than the spectator value that it would provide in terms of entertainment pre-fight. Entertainment during the fight, highly entertaining. Entertainment pre-fight, it wouldn't have the entertainment pre-fight that obviously Khabib and Conor Part 2 would. So there you have it. So now we get into this UFC on ABC card. It was really cool to have the UFC on ABC. I must say, it was a shock, to be honest with you, that the UFC would be on ABC. The way that it was, to start the year, that was great. It was awesome to start the year off with a card on ABC. It was also on ESPN Plus, but to have it nationally televised, I think any card that is nationally televised, the UFC has to dip into this business a little bit more, and I think they will. I don't think this is the last time that we will see the UFC on ABC. I hope it isn't. I really hope it isn't. And to have a main event featuring a former UFC featherweight champion in Max Holloway, who is still regarded as one of the most popular fighters that the UFC has had in the last, 5-6 years, This was Holloway's first non-title fight since 2016. And, he goes on to win the featherweight title. He defends it successfully 3 times before losing it to Alexander Volkanovski in 2019. He challenged Volkanovski for the title once more and lost once more. And that was one of the most controversial decisions that I have seen in recent memory. I think that you would ask 10 people and 9 of them would say that Max Holloway won that fight versus Alexander Volkanovski. Truly terrible, inept scoring decision there by the 3 judges that scored that bout. That was the UFC's first event on Fight Island. Calvin Kattar, who comes into that one, as I mentioned earlier in the show, on a 2-fight win streak. He had won 4 of his last 5 fights. And heading into this one, Kattar, coming off of those 2 wins, you think this guy is an up-and-coming fighter in the 145-pound weight class, but there are levels to this game. And Max Holloway, when I say that Max Holloway put on one of the most impressive performances I have ever seen, yeah, he did. When I say Max Holloway did something today that I have never, ever, ever seen before, yeah, he did. Max Holloway put on a pace unlike anything that I've ever seen. Over 700 strikes thrown, almost 300 significant strikes landed in this one, and holy crap, this was a pummeling performance from Max Holloway. At one point in the fight, Max Holloway turned away from Calvin Kattar and told the broadcast team, cage side, that he was the best boxer in the UFC. And it was a little bit poetic because on ABC, the network that has been a home for boxing since the 1940s, Holloway proved his point in this fight with his punches. And on the judges' scorecards, as they read, Holloway dominated Calvin Kattar via unanimous decision by a score of 50-43, 50-43, and 50-42. I have never, in all my years of watching mixed martial arts and covering this sport on this podcast, I have never heard a 50-42 judges scorecard in one of the most one-sided fights, let alone main events, in the history of the UFC. And it's unfortunate in this sense. Calvin Kattar is a great fighter. Calvin Kattar is a solid fighter in the UFC featherweight division. He's a solid fighter in the UFC for that matter. It just goes to show you how elite Max Holloway is. Max Holloway is truly the elite of the elite, as I like to say on this show, the elite of the elite, which means within the elite fighters, Max Holloway is still even ranked as a top 3 fighter in the UFC. And to say that for a fighter that doesn't have a belt wrapped around his waist, it is incredible. And Max Holloway, being Max Holloway, post this absolute destruction of a performance, a stand-up striking boxing clinic, Max Holloway flat out schooled Calvin Kattar. He hops on the mic after the fight. He says, hey, if Dustin Poirier gets hurt, I'll step in there and fight Conor. If Conor gets hurt, I'll step in there and fight Dustin Poirier again. I fought both guys. I'd love to get one of those fights back. Dana White, though, had the perfect compliment to Max Holloway, calling him one of the greatest of all time, one of the greats, one of the all-time greats, period, in fighting. Quote, I think that people keep doubting Max and thinking, is old Max going to show up, the guy who has lost a step and all this? And he just doesn't. A lot of people whom we all respect and know a lot about the sport pick Kattar to win tonight. Let's give Kattar the respect he deserves, too. It takes 2 to make a great fight. It was incredible. And it was. I mean, here's the thing, though. As incredible as this fight was, were there moments where this fight should have and could have been stopped? 100%. Did the corner of Calvin Kattar take years off of Calvin Kattar's career with this fight? 110%. 110. Not 100, 110%. Post the 3rd round, this fight could have been stopped in any moment. Max Holloway was dispatching Calvin Kattar, and Calvin Kattar just kept pushing forward or evading the strikes. And piece of UFC history here, the scorecards were tied for the most lopsided fight in a 5-round title fight in UFC history, or a 5-round fight in UFC history, along with a bout between Rich Ace Franklin and David Loazo from UFC 58 in 2006. The 50-42 scorecard was only the second ever in UFC history after Franklin and Loazo. So I think that Max Holloway shattered a lot of records over the course of his career. He shattered records today. Significant strikes landed, 445. The previous was 290. Significant strike attempts, 744. Previous was 515. Distance strikes landed, 439. Previous was 281. Significant head strikes landed, 274. Previous was 244. And significant body strikes landed, 117, previous was 92. Significant strikes landed in a round, 141 strikes in a round was what Holloway was able to land. And total strikes landed 447, previous to 361. Total strikes attempted 746. Previous was 541. So this was a storybook performance, and this was a great performance that I think I'll always remember. And to wrap up the show here, I think Max Holloway deserves the next crack at the title. As this fight was announced, we knew that Max wasn't going to get another crack at the title right out of the gate. They announced that shortly after UFC Fight Island. I didn't think that was quite fair. I thought they needed to do the rematch again with Volk and Holloway. Would have been the third straight fight between both guys, but even the first fight was controversial. The second fight was extremely controversial. As I alluded to, you asked 10 people, I think 9 of them say Holloway won that fight, but, I think that Holloway should fight the winner of Volkanovski and Ortega, and that fight, Volkanovski and Ortega, was announced today. You gotta give Holloway, the opportunity there, no matter what, no matter who wins that fight. I think Ortega's got a good shot at beating Volkanovski, and it would be the opposite end of the spectrum with Ortega representing himself as the champion in that one and Holloway representing himself as the title challenger. When the shoe was on the opposite foot, shoe was on the other foot, I should say, for the first time around between Holloway and Ortega. Holloway was the champ, and he dispatched Ortega in dominant fashion. But what we saw today, I've never seen from a fighter. So shout out to Max Holloway on a great performance. This was a great fight. I'm very excited to continue to provide you guys with more mixed martial arts content, with more combat sports content. Sidebar here to wrap up the show. I was ecstatic today to hear some boxing news that it looks like Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury will be fighting one another. That's the biggest fight in boxing heavyweight history of the last 30 years. It's a fight that's needed to happen. It's a fight that's going to happen, and I cannot wait to cover it on the show for you guys as we inch closer to the announcement of when they will actually fight. That will be a great bout between two heavyweight titans. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Take care, and, of course, go Bills. It's going to be a great game tonight.